Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Nostalgia Trap podcast. My name is David Parsons. I'm happy that you are listening to the show. I hope you're doing well. I hope you enjoy these conversations. My guest today is another great one. Her name is Liza Featherstone. I am betting that many of the listeners of this show would know her work. She writes a lot in The Nation about labor issues, about feminism, about all the kinds of things that concern this show. But she's also responsible for a lot of books. The one that we talk about a lot is about Walmart. It's called Selling Women Short, the landmark battle for workers' rights at Walmart, which is a history of the case, the Supreme Court case Dukes versus Walmart, which at the time was, I believe, the largest class action lawsuit of its kind. We talk about Walmart, what Walmart represents. I always think of that place, that institution, that corporation, as a rather evil entity, probably the most monstrous manifestation of capitalism in our times, and Liza has a lot to share about it. She gives me a lot more detail on how the Walmart Corporation functions, how it deals in particular with labor, and we had a really fun conversation. We talked about trigger warnings and feminism and higher education and all sorts of great stuff. I had a really great time talking to Liza, so I hope you enjoy this episode. There are many more episodes on iTunes. You can go to nostalgiatrap.libsyn.com to find all the episodes. They're all on Stitcher.com. And if you go to your Facebook and search for Nostalgia Traps page and like it, you'll get updates on new episodes and all sorts of other stuff. I hope you enjoy. This is a great conversation with me and writer, journalist Liza Featherstone.
Yeah, my parents were pretty political, especially in the 60s. Mm-hmm. My father wrote speeches for Eugene McCarthy, and was there were posters against from the Vietnam War days when I was growing up.
The clean gene.
Clean for gene.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I definitely grew up in a political household. I guess, my earliest memory of anything political is actually a weird one. I remember when Gerald Ford pardoned Richard Nixon, and that all the adults were really upset about it.
Yeah.
But I felt kind of bad for Nixon because everyone was clearly so displeased with him.
You felt bad for him?
Yeah.
You were young.
I was like 4.
Yeah.
That's, so just sort of this sense of condemnation.
Oh, he's like universally hated.
Yeah. And thinking, man, that's, poor guy.
Yeah, it's weird. I sometimes I see. Nixon has so much pathos to him that he's like probably one of the most like outwardly insane presidents we've ever had. And so it's kind of there's a pity element when I look at him. Whenever I see him like sweating,
absolutely
crying, like there was something. If you read it, there's this book by Gary Wills called Nixon Agonistes, and it's like literally just like about how sad and insane a person this guy was. Really shouldn't have been in control of as much as he was in control of at that moment.
Yeah. Well, people don't really read anymore, but I like to teach. I don't mean people don't like
people
to
don't
read
anything anymore.
I don't mean that. I mean this book. I don't think people read it that much, but I like to teach it. The Selling of the President by Joe McGinnis.
Yeah.
And that's. I think that's the best Nixon book. Just like the sense of. Nixon as the the kid who's like, you're gonna beat up and take his lunchbox.
And tragic to be placed next to Kennedy in the 1960 election. There's something so sad about it. But then I remember who Nixon is and what his values were, and then
shitty
like,
person.
Why should I care or have any sympathy for this guy at all? Why should I even think of American history in terms of presidents at all? But we end up thinking that way anyway. It's weird.
No, we do. I mean, it's funny having a kid and realizing that kids just think presidents are fascinating.
Yeah,
and they want to memorize all of them and know what order they come in, and they want to know interesting trivia about them. And as adults, we almost measure our sophistication by how much we don't care about them.
Yeah, right. It's like not liking the president is like not saying you don't watch TV. It's a way of putting yourself above. Oh, I don't look at electoral politics at all. Yeah.
And if you're really advanced, you don't even vote.
Yeah. That's the apex of human evolution is not voting or engaging at all in politics. Yeah, sometimes I think that way. I mean, it's weird because I think of Russell Brand because he's like the no voting guy. Yeah. But I mean, you couldn't say that he's not engaged in politics.
No, of course not.
Okay, so as you get older, I mean, it sounds like 4 years old. You're feeling sorry for Nixon.
Right.
At what point did those politics become a little more sophisticated?
Yeah. Well, I guess there was a lot of stuff going on throughout my growing up with the nuclear freeze movement. We went to AntiNuke protests somewhat, and definitely in high school, some of us were really into anti-nuke stuff.
It's funny because you can judge the age of lefty people by like finding out what their parents were into, and at this point I've met people who have parents that go all the way back to red diaper stuff in the like 40s and 50s, but then people that are a little bit younger are like, well, my parents were really into like the nuclear thing, or even younger, like my students, like left students that their parents were into Reagan, and that protesting Reagan was there. So it's really interesting how it's like interesting and depressing in terms of like looking at what the big issues were for each decade. That
no, it's true. Yeah. All of us who had somewhat political growings up, we are kind of it is a little bit of a zeitgeist window. And so I think I went with my family to that big Central Park. Yeah, AntiNuke, the famous big demonstration in 1982.
Yeah, yes. I mean, it's funny you don't see that as much, right? Like the anti-nuclear stuff. Well,
because it was such a product of the Cold War.
Yeah,
I mean the sense of
real threat
and the sense that there really could be a nuclear holocaust, and even though like if you listen to real experts on this, which I'm not at all. If you listen to them now, they'll say, oh, we're at so much more danger of having a nuclear war now.
So it seems like.
Yeah, but it isn't as much something that we can have any political leverage on. I think. I mean, it's so. I mean, when it was part of the Cold War, it was really a left cause. Because we could see this is the crazy place that your anti-communism is leading to.
Yes,
is leading us to the brink of nuclear holocaust. We can't really make a coherent left argument about what is causing nuclear war, the threat of nuclear war now. Right. I mean, so just like we as the left just kind of let it go, right?
Yeah,
I mean, because it's not really about anything.
It's kind of an insane and terrifying thought, though.
Right?
There's no counter to just the possibility.
I know. Well, I think about this a lot because actually, most of my early politicization after Nixon, right, was sort of, wrapped up with this kind of apocalyptic thinking.
Yeah.
So and that was very much a part of that time was that we're in this insane war with the Soviets, and we could destroy the world, and Ronald Reagan is a madman.
Yes.
So right. So now, we can't we can't identify the problem quite so clearly, so we don't protest about it anymore.
Right.
But absolutely, it is still pretty alarming. I guess I'd say, though, for that sense of apocalypse now, I guess we've kind of the left has probably substituted climate change.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
Yeah,
is that it's climate change that, and if anyone's concerned about, whenever I hear about concerns about nuclear war, it's usually in the guise of like something like 24 or some right wing fantasy about terrorism, and dirty bombs and stuff like that. But I think you're right that climate change is the apocalyptic kind of element of the left right now. Yeah,
and we don't. It's not quite it's not quite as politically focused in a way as the nuclear freeze stuff was. I mean, we don't quite know when we're protesting about climate change who we're directing that protest to and what we're really recommending.
Right.
Like with the nuclear freeze, it was just very clear. It was like, stop the Cold War. Like, don't be anti-communist maniacs. Stop escalating the arms race, right? And it was really directed toward the state.
Yeah, and
toward
ultimately,
the US
like
state.
8 guys in the State Department. You
right,
know what I mean?
very specific people who were not very interested in listening to us, but were nonetheless very, very particular individuals. Yeah. Whereas it's a little harder to say where we're.
Well, climate change seems to bring into question for me like the whole project of industrialization. It's like it's really kind of asking big questions about. How do we live as human beings on the planet? And that seems like it's destined to just branch into a million different directions. I mean, some people want to talk about food, some people want to talk about labor, some people want to talk about transportation, and it just becomes this. It's a big project. That's what's kind of terrifying about it to me is that watching these things go unsettled, for so long. It's hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
So if we can go back, it sounds like you're kind of coming of age in the like late 70s and 80s.
Yeah. So I was born in 1969.
Okay.
So, yeah. So I'm a kid in the 70s, and
Reagan probably would have been the first real president that you knew understood the politics of.
Yes. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, I remember Jimmy Carter, but I would like every other female my age, I did write letters to Amy Carter, asking her to make sure her dad didn't start a nuclear war.
Oh my God.
And I'm not the only one. Like, if you talk to women who are about my age, 45. Who are now political, they all did this.
They wrote a letter to Amy Carter.
Totally.
And had like a pet rock on the table while they're
totally. Totally. They did.
Yellow smiley face. I just have this 70s cliches in my head.
Yeah. You should walk around the Grand Center and ask this question. If they say they didn't, they're lying.
Yeah.
They definitely did.
Letters to Amy.
Totally.
Yeah, no, I see that. And I mean... were you? I mean, because you write a little bit about feminism. Like, how much was a second wave feminism or that thing that was going on in the 70s? How much was that a part of your consciousness?
It was so absolutely taken for granted. I think my mother was such a feminist that she didn't even talk about it. It was
second nature.
It was like you weren't even told that shaving your legs was a thing, because it was that's just so outrageously sexist.
Patriarchal.
Yeah.
Was that language in your house?
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Interesting. I mean, I'm saying that it's really kind of true that my mother was such a feminist that we weren't even told about feminism, because it just wasn't, it was just we're just not even going to have any patience for this patriarchal stuff. No,
Do you think she would have been disappointed if you had been, if you hadn't been, like, do you think she would have like corrected your like, if you had just wanted to be a cheerleader and like gone in that direction, and she would have said like, hey, listen, we're feminists here.
No,
We don't
no. She wouldn't have. She wouldn't have. She was like, no.
Because I think about having kids sometimes, and like, what if your kids are reactionaries? Like, what if your kids
you kind of have to try to steer them away from it, but you also have to let them go their own path.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Yeah, So no, but there was yeah, I mean that is an interesting question. I mean, like feminism in the 70s was such a part of the culture that there was, there's sort of we sort of have this idea that it was that second wave feminism was really strident, because, sometimes when you meet second wave individual feminists like that, they are like that. But second wave feminism itself, I think, was not strident because it was so much a part of the culture that there wasn't really a need for it to be. I mean, it was so everybody was kind of conscious that that it would be sexist to say girls can't do X, Y, and Z. And it was very it was very mainstreamed in a way that I think it is not now.
So you think there's been like that like Susan Faludi like backlash thing has had an effect in the culture, and that it's actually less so and less taken for granted that you don't say things like that.
Yeah. I think so. I mean, you certainly see it raising kids. That there's that there are very much boy things and girl things. If you walk into a store, it's like the girl half of the store is all pink and princesses, and the boy half of the store is all even more disturbingly, even than the gender aspect, the boy aspect side is all militarism.
And people are very defensive about that when you bring it up.
Very.
They're like, what is wrong with it? What is wrong with it? There are boy things and girl things. There's nothing wrong with that.
Very.
And I hear that especially from my students, which is really disappointing. Like I'm often, and maybe this is just a product of the schools I've taught at, but my students are, sometimes I'm scared to talk to them about feminism or find out what they think about it in writing. Like, well, let's do a free write on feminism. And I get these things back. I'm like, I don't want to read this. I don't want to read their attitudes because it's from women and men that have a kind of defensive-ness about, well, it's okay that there are different separate spheres. They enjoy that, or they get some sense of safety from it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I hear what you're talking about a lot from other parents, actually. But I'm interested that it's interesting you hear that from your students, because I feel like feminism is actually one of the. I teach at Brooklyn College, and I feel like it's one of those things that I don't know. They're all feminists. Other issues that we discuss are a lot more controversial. Than I mean, within that,
I hope that's true.
Within that, they're not necessarily pro-choice or whatever, but they're all feminists in some sense. Like and pretty even some of the men.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the school I was mentioning is Baruch, which is very business driven.
Yes, that is very businessy.
I think that the type of students you get at Baruch tend to be a little more conservative.
Yeah.
A little more kind of rooted in their parents' tradition, because they're all business majors. They're all accounting, marketing, and the type of student at Brooklyn College is perhaps different than that.
Yeah.
And it's funny to think even within CUNY,
that
there's like kind of a variation among the types of students.
Yeah. No, it's something it's something I enjoy about it, because they're so diverse. I mean, ethnically, politically.
You never know what your class is going to be.
You never know what they're going to be like. But that sort of baseline women's rights, and kind of concern with that has been kind of a consensus in a number of my classes.
Yeah, it's weird because you hear about it like, if you're following the discourse on feminism that goes on today, you see it happening at different schools in different ways, but it feels like, this conversation lately in the past couple of years has been, I think maybe schools in California about like trigger warnings and stuff like that, and it's like, and on the one hand, I'm like, well, that's, this is absurd, and I get so upset. Like, these trigger warnings are just ridiculous, and I'm not putting a trigger warning on anything. I want to disrupt my students. I want to show them material that bothers them, etc. I don't even want to warn them about it. I'm going to tell them this is like an episode of Three's Company, and then put something horrific on. But on the other hand, I wonder, like, how, like, I always have to say my parents, because they're kind of like mainstream, they just watch TV. They have no idea what trigger warnings are. Like, no. That conversation, how big is that conversation?
That covers the trigger warning conversation is not big, and it's interesting how big it is in the media and on social media.
Right.
But I don't think most of my students know what a trigger warning is.
Right.
At Brooklyn College, and I had one request. Like, one student said, "Oh, you should have put a trigger warning on this," but she was much more privileged than my students usually are. Like, she was much more in that demographic of, like, please take care of us, like our parents did.
Yeah.
I mean, which I don't really get from most of my students. Is that where that
comes from? That kind of, like,
it's a little
privileged
bit
liberalism. It's kind of lightly fascist in the
that kind of hypersensitivity. Yeah, I do think it is a little bit demographic. My feeling about trigger warnings is, I just hate that kind of dumb jargon. So I would never put that on my syllabus because it's just so vulgar.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
But
it's such a buzzword thing.
It's such a buzzword.
Like
exactly.
Yeah.
Like, just like I'm not going to tell them to innovate.
Yeah. Or like talk about their deliverables.
Yeah. It's just horrific, right?
Yeah.
But I do sometimes, say, some of this material might be a little bit intense. It deals with sexual assault.
Sure,
that might be very personal for some people. I do say those things. But I was wondering the other day, there was yet another controversy about trigger warnings. And I was wondering, why doesn't anybody ever ask, or study whether trigger warnings actually get more students to do the reading.
Right?
Because
it's like putting the parental advisory sticker on a CD. That's the CD. Those are the CDs I wanted.
Exactly. And so, like, I mean, to me, if somebody was telling me this reading is going to be very emotionally charged and will likely relate to your life, I'm going to read that.
Yeah. It's like your parents saying, don't look in that drawer of magazines. It's like, well, that's the first drawer I'll look at when you're gone. Yeah.
And especially if they're saying it might be very upsetting. I mean, it's like, I'm there.
No,
I'm going to read that before I read any of my other readings.
That's true. I mean, I think I would have been that type of student to look at that stuff. I mean, I teach a class on Vietnam a lot and on Vietnam War, and I tell my students at the beginning, look, this class is like rated NC-17. We're going to be looking at a lot of really hard. It's the Vietnam War. I mean, it's horror. We're going to look at hell.
Yeah.
And they're all like red. Like, it's like I don't even need to warn them. Like, we took it for this reason. Like, it's what we want to see. It's funny to think of because I actually remember going through like Sam Goody, or when we used to have these things called record stores where you could go in and look at records, and seeing the parental advisory stickers really drew me to those particular albums.
Of course.
I'm like, that's dangerous. I want that.
So I just like think it's kind of funny because I share people's distaste with the idea of the trigger warning just because, it seems like one of those bullshit, trendy, like, and also kind of coddling things. But I think it's funny how people always seem to frame it as if it's some sort of incursion on academic freedom, or that it will, or that it will, that students will use it as an excuse to not do the reading, and just like I really would guess that the effects would be just the opposite.
And again, it's like is that really the academic freedom issue of our time?
Exactly. When you've got like people being fired for their opinions about Palestine. And,
exactly.
It's just like
It seems like we could be talking about something more. I mean, the thing is, like, on a serious note, though, like, I know that the people that are, cycling that language around are their heart is in the right place in the sense that they want to help victims of sexual assault.
Yes, absolutely.
It's coming from the right place, but it seems like it's like a little infantilizing towards victims of sexual assault. Like, if you are, or victims of any traumatic experience, if you have a traumatic experience, you're going to go through the rest of your life being triggered by just a word or an image. I mean, it just seems like it makes it like it doesn't help victims feel empowered at all. It makes them feel like they're going to be hypersensitive the rest of their life.
Yeah. I mean, that's it. It does seem that way to me as well.
All right, so I feel like there needs to be a trigger warning when we talk about Walmart, because Walmart is kind of a for me, like this, huge monolithic kind of block of industrial and economic and political fact in American life for the last, I guess, 30 years.
Yeah.
But when Walmart came to my town when I was young, it was a big deal, and we didn't know what it was. And I feel like in a way, my political consciousness has kind of grown along with realizing what Walmart is, what it represents for our country. How did you first come to interest in Walmart and write about them?
Yeah, well,
I say them, it, he. I don't know what the face of this thing is, but
well, I mean, I guess in the 90s, I was I started writing. I guess maybe in the mid and late 90s, I started writing a lot about labor issues, and especially in the retail sector, and I was kind of initially drawn to this situation of kind of low-wage knowledge workers, like people who worked in chain bookstores, and their situation was in many ways like mine, because I was also a low-wage knowledge worker. I did a lot of editorial work for magazines, and I was a freelance writer also, so I wrote a number of stories on workers like that, and then started getting from there interested in the retail sector as a whole, and sort of predictions and projections that these were the jobs that were most likely to continue growing in our economy.
Right.
And despite the sort of excited hubbub around the new economy, and we're all going to be in workplaces with beanbag chairs, and it's all, and having stock options, and it's all going to be
beer
really
pong tables,
groovy. Right. And I knew people who had jobs like that, and I also knew a lot of other people who weren't prospering in the so-called new economy. But I was really interested in this idea that we sort of had we sort of were enjoying as a culture the fun of this technological boom, and the sort of spirited Clinton era exuberance around that, while what our economy was actually producing of much more of for a lot more people were these crappy retail jobs. So I got really interested in retail and retail work, and when I was writing some about McDonald's workers, I was struck by, whenever I talked to union people about this sector and about these jobs, the union people would always say, it's basically, we can't really organize this sector because Walmart. And so then I started asking a lot more questions.
And they meant the service sector in general.
The whole service sector in general.
Workers, but people at McDonald's or any of these other types of jobs.
Yes, that the existence of the fact of the largest private employer in the nation being this resolutely unorganized and unorganizable behemoth was just such a obstacle for the labor movement and for this entire group of workers that was only going to grow. And so that seemed like a really deeply disturbing and compelling problem to look at. And so I got very interested in Walmart. And while I was, just kind of trying to figure it out, an editor called and asked me to write that book that I wrote, Selling Women Short, which was about the sex discrimination.
What's the full title of that book? It's Selling Women Short.
The landmark battle for workers' rights at Walmart.
And that's about the Dukes case.
Yes. Yeah. So that book focuses on Betty Dukes versus Walmart, which is the largest. Well, is no longer, but it was the largest civil rights class action suit in history, and focused on the sex discrimination claims of women at Walmart.
How much were you aware? It sounds like you were. Do you want to pause it? Have a delivery.
Sure.
Have a delivery from Walmart. 1 second.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, what I was going to ask was, let me think. It was about, how much were you aware, and it sounds like you were aware of this when you started writing about Walmart, you started writing about service workers and retail workers, that there was like a larger kind of evolution that we're all talking about now, which is that, the end of the industrial base and manufacturing as the primary thing that the working class is doing, and moving on. Because I always tell my students that like a working class person is no longer a factory worker, it's probably a cashier at Walmart. How much were you aware of that evolution going on?
I was not actually that. I was not that literate on those kinds of political economy issues when I first started reporting on these things. But I did have a general sense of that, and it really I got a very clear sense of it as an experience when I started interviewing a lot of people. Like a lot of Walmart workers had worked in factories, and especially the older women, and now they were working at Walmart. Or
isn't that interesting? Think of in a single lifetime.
So it was very. I had a sense of it much as a biographical thing as a macroeconomic thing.
It's the president thing. We have to have like a one person story. To be able to make sense of it all.
That's right. And also so many people lived in these towns that had been factory towns and had been kind of prospering working class industrial towns, and now they were and now they were places where the main thing was a Walmart. I mean, Betty Dukes, the lead plaintiff in the case, who I have interviewed quite a lot. Her town, Pittsburgh, California, not to be confused with the better known Pittsburgh, was an industrial hub, and now there's just stuff like Walmart. You
can think of it that way, of like that Michael Moore, like Flint, Michigan stuff. Like General Motors leaves, there's a vacuum, but then Walmart comes and kind of fills that vacuum, but with a much even more like kind of streamlined exploitation.
Now, I mean, and streamlined is an interesting word and a really good one, because one of the things that was interesting about the way that people seem to experience that shift biographically was a lot of people liked working at Walmart better than working in factories. I mean, they did in most cases get paid a bit better working in the factory, and those were more stable long-term jobs, with less of the nonsense about, are you going to even get on the schedule this week? And,
right.
I mean, and there was much less precarity in those jobs, but the actual job itself, I definitely, a lot of women liked showing up to Walmart
more than
better
going to the
than
factory.
showing up to the factory. Like it's not so monotonous. You have it's a bit more sociable.
There's stuff everywhere.
There's
that
stuff
you can take home some of it
everywhere
for really cheap.
And there are customers, and by definition, like different people coming in
It's
all
a social
day.
place. It's like the center of town.
Yeah, and there's sort of more satisfaction in kind of helping people find what they need, and there's a way in which the Walmart Walmart is one of those workplaces that does capture a lot of what is good in people.
Yes,
like people want to help. People want to interact with other people. Like they don't really want to be just like on an assembly line.
Well, I think that's something that's kind of like disturbing about Walmart in a sense, is that it's got this kind of like it's the civic center, and it's like this is where it's a privately owned kind of marketplace for not just buying stuff for cheap, but everyone in the town works there and we all interact there. I mean, one of the saddest things I've ever heard in my life is this article a while back that was about how at certain Walmarts you could put they had a program where you could put a flag on your cart as you walked around the store that said that you were single and looking.
Really?
And so you could walk around, and I just had the image of a person walking around by themselves in a cart with a flag up, hoping that someone notices them. And it's just something so tragic and insane about that.
That's funny. I mean, I guess it is kind of tragic because it's Walmart, and we don't think of that as being a very inspiring environment.
Inspiring human environment.
Right. But
I don't mean to be condescending. I mean,
but on the
it's
other
a
hand,
paradox. It is.
Right. I mean, it is. It is a paradox because that's where a lot of people are going to meet and connect.
So, what is it? I mean, what is it about Walmart and women specifically that you got hooked onto here?
Right. Well, so partly. So I was already interested in Walmart as a political problem for workers, and as a and as a kind of obstacle to people organizing and trying to make a better life. But the gender issues I was very compelled by as well, because it really seemed that it really seemed that in these growing retail workplaces that it was much harder for workers to assert any kinds of rights at all. And whether those rights were freedom of association or anything else. And in the context where workers have very few rights at all, obviously women workers are going to get much more screwed. People of racial minorities are going to be much more discriminated against, because everybody is valued less and has less recourse to address any kind of grievance, and so
is often in a more vulnerable position economically outside of work too.
Exactly. In the case of the women, absolutely, because in many cases they would be more likely to end up with the kids. They would be taking care of their parents. They would have more poorly paid other employment options.
I mean, don't you get the sense that people that are working at Walmart, by virtue of the fact that they're working at Walmart, are already at a certain kind of economic position in the context of the rest of America? Yes,
exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, that, and the dumbest thing that people ever say when you talk about Walmart is, I mean, and this is quite a contest.
Yeah.
But the dumbest thing that people ever say is, well, how bad can it be? Because whenever a Walmart opens up, there are so many people applying for those jobs.
Yeah.
I
mean, you could say the same thing about the factories in China.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and
exploited people are capable of being exploited. Wow. Look
right.
at that.
But it's as if the fact that people would choose to work there is kind of a vindicates it,
right.
As an economic arrangement.
Yeah.
And it's always amazing to me that people think that and don't really understand all the constraints on these people. Like most of these workers do not don't even have enough of a safety net to quit and find a job the next day.
Right. They have to because they can't miss a day of work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but even if you find a job the next day, your paycheck is delayed in a way that completely disrupts your life at that end of the pay scale.
Ironically, it's like if we replace the 1960s and 1970s factory with Walmart, then the workers have lost quite a bit of protection in that way. It seems like it seems like Walmart's run like a Gilded Age factory in some respects.
Yes, yes, except without the constant wildcat strikes that kept those factory owners in line.
Right. Radicalism.
Which did help to often to reinforce some kind of social contract in the in that period.
Well, what are the possibilities for something like that now, and in terms of Walmart? I mean, we hear, every once in a while I hear like some wave of and I don't follow it super closely, but I do see these waves of like Walmart strikes. Around there was one around Black Friday this year.
Yes.
It seems like if that's the working class and if that's the largest employer in the United States and I think one of the largest retailer, the largest retailer in the world, then that has to be the site of it. But is that something that can happen? It seems like, and the other question in that is like, how does Walmart fight that?
Yeah,
they're really. I imagine they're fucking evil in the way they go after these people.
Yes, they are. Well, so actually the rolling Black Friday and other strikes, or I guess they're sort of technically not known as strikes, but more walkouts usually. I think it's really interesting. I mean, it is as if that group of workers is sort of saying, well, look, you're going to bring back, if you Walmart are going to bring back the 19th century in so many ways, in the lack of worker protections, the lack of mass unionization, we'll bring back some other things about the 19th century, like the constant strikes to make small localized gains. Or to just enforce some really basic workplace rule, or to teach them a lesson about something particularly egregious that the management did. And it's very interesting. And when I first started reporting on Walmart, which is now quite a long time ago, more than 10 years ago, that I started talking to people there, it was unthinkable that there would be these that any Walmart workers anywhere in the United States would go on strike. Ever.
Yeah, I see. I had that idea from 10 years ago.
It was absolutely inconceivable.
Yeah.
The people that I was talking to were incredibly courageous if they picked up the phone and called their local retail union and were like, how can I start a union at my Walmart? That was a completely radical act.
I remember
like the idea that people would be like, putting on the internet that they were going on strike. I mean, this is pretty. It's pretty amazing, and I know that there are a lot of there are a lot of caveats one should make about the specific form of the organizing, that it's hard to tell where it's going. It's hard to tell what the end game is institutionally. Institutionally, some of the large unions seem to have not a great history of letting the rank and file workers run their own organizations. It's just really hard to tell where it's going to go. Yeah. But the fact that it's happening at all is so hugely different from anything that you could have imagined 10 years ago.
I agree. And I think it's easy as a cranky left person to forget things like that. And that what's going on with Ferguson and Eric Garner here in New York, that when the battle in Seattle happened in 1999, people were freaking out about police militarization and the kind of really scary, aggressive attitudes that police were taking towards protesters and left people in particular. But now it seems like there's a giant movement around that. Yeah. And as much as we like to attack it for, well, it doesn't have this in its leadership structure, or there aren't enough women, or whatever, and that's great. We need to have all those conversations, but it's also kind of, we should step back and be like, look what's happening. Yeah. It does seem like we've reached some sort of critical mass on some of these issues, at least. Yeah,
absolutely. And on the recent protests, I think I think that it's incredible, and I think you can see the way in which the protests in the wake of the Trayvon Martin case, which coincided with Occupy. Yeah. And or the very beginning of Occupy, really. And those two events, the Trayvon Martin hoodies up and the and Occupy, really put into place all these habits of mind and kind of organizing infrastructures, and also just kind of got a lot more people socialized into the idea that you need to get in the streets when something happens. Right. Which was not a thing. It's not a thing that we regularly do in the United States of America, taking to the streets. No, not at all. And so just to socialize people into this is what we do.
Yeah, like in France, they have a strike every week. Right. The subway never works in France. They're on strike every day.
Right. So if we were there, the Walmart protest wouldn't be such a big deal. But here, that we have all these things happening is quite remarkable.
Yeah, I mean, and I think many of us are dreaming of that confluence of the racial and class issues and coming together. If you could get Occupy and the Walmart strikes and the Ferguson stuff, all together at once, that's the left. I mean, that's what the left should look like.
Yeah, and I think there is quite a lot of crossover in those things. Yeah, How does
Walmart fight unions? I mean, what do they do to get? Because it seems like a part of their conscious strategy. When I think of the American heroes of Reaganism and that, and the entrepreneurial kind of capitalism of the '80s, that Walmart really kind of isn't that when Walmart really took off in the '80s? But it's like Ray Kroc and Sam Walton. These people are considered heroes for really figuring out ways to do quote unquote more with less, which is neoliberalism. I mean, that's what we hear that at CUNY. I have had administrators in meetings literally look at me and say how can we do more with less? And it seems like that's the mantra. Yeah. So and the less is for them in Walmart is less union activity, less union strength. Yeah, but wasn't that a conscious part of their strategy? Isn't that
this was absolutely been a conscious part of their strategy? There is there have been for a long time manuals given to Walmart managers that say essentially keeping your workplace union free is as important as anything else you do as a Walmart manager. So it essentially more important than moving more lawnmowers,
Yeah,
more important
yeah.
than
Making sure that Hershey Kisses display is up for Valentine's.
Is you have to keep the union out.
Also, crush the unions.
Yeah,
Crush the working class ability to make things better for themselves. Yes.
Exactly. No, so it's absolutely fundamental. And
they tell the workers too. Like, isn't there a level of propaganda? I mean, I think I saw a Target video. It was recently that like it was one of those leaks that like Target internal video that they show their employees that was like, if anyone ever tries to get you in a union, run to your nearest manager and tell them immediately. I mean, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it's really it's really important, and they are shown they are shown anti-union videos when they begin the job.
How do they pitch that to them? I know are they telling them the union is going to hurt them?
Yeah, I mean that the union is the union is not necessary. That you don't need a third party. If some union organizing effort starts, the rhetoric will be harsher. I mean, and in many cases,
personal.
Yeah, like it could be personal, but it could also be directly threatening. Like managers will often tell Walmart workers that the store could close down, which is of course illegal. To make a threat or claim
like a factory closing
like that.
Was illegal. Yeah.
But it has actually happened.
Wow.
That Walmart has in fact closed units or stores or distribution centers
over threats of union organization.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep. So they have done that. The famous thing that they did in the 90s was there was a there was an effort to unionize a meat cutting department in a store in Texas, in a Walmart store in Texas, and so it was a small unit, so it actually wasn't that hard to organize it. So the employees did organize it. They did vote to join. I think the Teamsters, and Walmart decided at headquarters that they would eliminate all meat cutting departments.
Like, fine, we don't
in
need
the
that.
entire company.
Wow.
Like
it kind of shows you how much power the union activity has when it's like organized that way.
Absolutely.
Walmart's like, fuck it, we won't sell meat anymore.
Absolutely.
It's like amazing.
No, Walmart gets how important important unions are.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way that most like a lot of workers don't. Even
it's almost
get.
it's almost like they employ labor historians. Like what?
Exactly.
I sometimes as a historian, I sometimes wonder about that. Who's telling them all? Because they seem to really be savvy.
It's
they know.
true.
They know what how to. They know the directions that the water can flow, and they know where to put the dams up. You know what I mean?
That's
right.
This
is where we can stop this.
That's right. No, they really know. That's exactly right. They really know that that they won't be able to control the workforce in the same way that they now do if it is unionized. And so it's just like meat cutting. Like I mean we don't need compared to control over our entire workforce.
Yeah,
we don't really need to have
that's what's so
meat cutting
about
departments.
Bigness, right?
Yeah,
I mean that's what's so scary about like giant corporations in a sense is that they can take the loss. I mean, I think about it here in like gentrification in New York where it's like rent goes up on some little bodega and it's now $70,000 a month. The only kind of people that could pay that are a corporation, like the only people. So it's like, well, we get a Radio Shack there or a Verizon store or some other bank or whatever because they're the only people that could possibly pay the rent.
Or if you're on the Upper West Side, a Dwayne Reed on every block.
Yeah.
Like it's like
we're like in a Dwayne Reed right now. We're actually doing this interview in the back of a Dwayne Reed. Yeah.
We practically are.
It's insane. Part of it seems to be like the kind of culture of capitalism in a sense is that Walmart's got a lock on the people in terms of delivering cheap goods, and people always bring that up. Is that you've got a lot of people who are Walmart supporters who are poor.
Yes.
And that seems like a big barrier too. It's not, in other words, it's not just Walmart being like, we're going to stop union activity.
Yeah.
There are a lot of people who are organically against union activity because they think that Walmart will change and things will be more expensive and we won't be able to go to this wonderful place.
Yeah. Well, I think that's one of the ideological feats of capitalism over the last century. I mean, in some ways, Walmart was like the culmination of this particular feat of capitalism, which was to convince people that that the system could deliver to them as consumers, and that therefore it didn't really matter what was happening to them as workers. So I mean, if you're looking at Walmart just as a consumer, it's like, it's a great deal. It's a $2 bra. Like, that's great. I mean,
a $5 Blu-ray player.
It's like you can't afford not to dress all 5 of your kids in new Easter dresses.
It's
you're
losing money not shopping here.
Right. Yeah. But if you and obviously if you look at it as a worker, it's like, well, you're on food stamps and you can't pay your rent and you can't even get on the schedule and get a full 40 hours. So it's obviously terrible. And and if you look at it in the larger in the larger picture as a worker, it's like, well, it's exerting downward pressure on all these other employers, and it could affect you. But it's that sense that where life is really experienced is at the point of consumption. Somehow that's the sort of ideological triumph of capitalism last century, basically. I think.
No, I think you're
right. And
it's that glow you get inside from purchasing a new thing, whatever it is, and the powers that be. I hate that phrase, but the elites have made it clear that that feeling is freedom.
Yes.
That's the root of American freedom, is the feeling you get from your freedom, and I maybe this is again a product of me teaching at a business school, but I think a lot of my students have internalized that idea, which is that, well, you could get a job in America and then you get money, and your freedom is how you spend that money buying stuff.
Right. That's where
which is weird, because that's like what the whole beat hippie thing in the 50s and 60s was rebelling against, that whole very concept, right when this whole thing was being born.
Right.
We're still in the same place.
Yeah, we're kind of still in the same place, and I mean, and Walmart is just the logical culmination of that. Like the fact that with a straight face, you get all these mainstream pundits saying, "But Walmart is great for the working class because just look at these low prices." Yeah, I mean, and much more disturbingly, I mean, you hear a lot of ordinary people who are struggling to get by saying exactly that same thing.
Yeah, and to be clear, that Walmart won the Duke's case in the Supreme Court, right?
So, not exactly. Walmart did win, but what they won was having the case thrown out entirely, not on its merits. So. So no court ever got to rule on the merits of the Duke's case. So no court has ever ruled on whether Walmart discriminated against its female workers. No court has ever even gotten to rule over whether Walmart discriminated against Betty Dukes herself.
Wow.
So all that courts have ever been issuing rulings over is this a class action suit?
Yeah.
And should it be allowed to move forward?
And do they constitute a class?
Right. Do the women of Walmart are the women of Walmart all similarly situated enough to constitute a class? And Walmart consistently made the argument that Walmart was this, it's funny how often we heard this argument in so many different political contexts, but Walmart basically argued that it was too big for the women.
Too big to fail.
Too big to be sued. Too big, which is like too big to fail. Exactly.
Yeah, right.
That it was too big for the women to constitute one coherent class.
That they were diverse within the organization.
That they were all just too varied as individuals.
Binders full of women.
Yes, they're all too varied as individuals, and our stores are all so different too, which is remarkable because, I mean, if you want to turn the air conditioning off in a store in Alaska, you need to get the headquarters in Bentonville, Arkansas, to do that for you.
Wow.
Yeah.
They have that level of centralization?
There is such an intense level of centralization.
Oh my God.
So when they make those arguments, each of our stores are so these special snowflakes.
Standardization is your entire thing.
And it's why Walmart works as a business. Is because it's so standardized.
I'm shocked that
so
Walmart
efficient.
would make a disingenuous legal argument.
Yeah, right. I know I shouldn't even be indignant about it, but I kind of, it is kind of amazing because the standardization and the centralized control is which I'm all for. I'm kind of a Hamiltonian Stalinist, but it works very well in their company. And the idea that they could make this argument that, we're all like, they're all such individuals and we're all such individuals, is so absurd. But it was very much in the interest of the business class as a whole to buy that argument, which is of course why the Supreme Court liked it so much. And many business groups wrote amicus briefs supporting Walmart's too big to be sued argument, of course, because why wouldn't they love it?
Well, I think that I think maybe it was Eisenhower, a famous quote that he said, like, as General Motors goes, so goes the rest of the American economy, or so goes the world. It's like I think that you could replace that with Walmart now, and so what Walmart's going to be the precedent-setting kind of business in America now, and that's what's really terrifying about Walmart. If so goes the world and so goes Walmart, then we're in trouble because Walmart, very openly wants to destroy the working class's ability to improve their lives.
Yeah, very openly.
All right, so we're running out of time here, but I do want to ask you about teaching journalism really quickly, because you teach journalism, and it's kind of a cliche to talk about journalism changing now and the new media landscape, and people talk about it in such, like, I don't know, pessimistic old man tones that, like, well, the David Simons of the world, right? Like, newspapers are over and we no longer get to go smoke a cigarette in a bar with a CIA agent, and that kind of thing. Like, how do you view the new media landscape? And I know that's kind of like a big question, but like, it seems like it's more democratic than before in some respects.
In many ways, it is. I don't teach journalism in the sense that I don't teach in a journalism school. But they'll qualify it that way. But I think it's a fascinating time to be teaching this stuff, and I think it's a fascinating time to be entering the field as a young person. And I think we just don't really know what's going to happen with all this stuff. And I think I think that in a way, the new media is kind of like Walmart in that it's never been a better time to be a media consumer.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an amazing time for people who like to read and be informed.
Yeah.
You know,
and I include myself in this. I mean, I love looking. I mean, I used to just watch, when I was a kid, I just watched Dan Rather and like the New York Times and stuff like that. But now I'm like, it feels like you can just get news from so many different sources. And I mean, even include like things like Vice magazine. And I'm not even a huge fan, but they have so much stuff that's like, and you don't think about like, okay, what is this?
Right.
Are all these Vice writers paid?
Right. Well, actually, the Vice writers are paid quite well, but in much of the new media landscape is powered by underpaid and often just entirely volunteer labor, and so we're not really asking, how is this going to be sustainable for the workers creating this stuff in the long in the long term, and I think that's going to be the really big question facing journalism and media.
And it makes me think about higher education as well, because I'm out of my PhD program a couple years and still don't have a full-time job, and it's part of the people around me, other graduate students that are like very cynical about and pessimistic about the future of higher education. It feels like at the same time that doesn't mean it's it feels like the same kind of landscape you're talking about with media, in that we don't know where things are headed. We know we're undergoing a transformation. It's weird to be a young person entering into a career that people are saying is dead. Don't be a professor. We're not going to even have colleges anymore. It'll all be online.
Right.
And like people are saying the same thing about newspapers and print journalism and everything else. But it feels like maybe that's like, I don't know, an obituary that's too soon. At the same, or not a reason to not go into these fields.
It's not a reason to not go into them, and I mean, and in the case of academia and to some extent media, I mean, you also have to ask, compared to what? I mean, that workplaces are very deeply shitty and precarious in so many different industries, and you might as well you should fight that, but you should also do what you love to do. I mean, and it's certainly not going to be any better to work at Starbucks or
Walmart.
It's definitely not going to be better to work at Walmart.
No, we hope it will be one day, or that even better, Walmart won't exist anymore.
Right. After we socialize Walmart, it might be a valid alternative to your academic career, but at the meantime, it's really not.
I'm going to stick on this track. Liza Featherstone, thanks so much for talking to me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.